Karen Whitfield's morning coffee turned bitter in her mouth as she stared through her kitchen window at the impossible sight before her. Where the Henderson family's sparkling blue pool had existed just yesterday, there was now nothing but pristine green grass, as if the pool had never existed at all. "This is a violation," she shrieked to her husband, Gerald, who was trying to read his newspaper in peace. "A clear violation of HOA regulations. You can't just make a pool disappear overnight." Gerald barely glanced up. "Maybe they filled it in, Karen. People do that sometimes. In 12 hours, without permits, without notifications." Karen's voice climbed to a pitch that made that elderly cat flee the room. She grabbed her phone and speed-dialed the HOA emergency line she'd programmed for exactly these situations. "This is Karen Whitfield, board member of Sunset Ridge Estates," she announced to the bewildered receptionist. "I need to report an immediate violation. Unauthorized pool removal without proper documentation." The receptionist's confused pause only fueled Karen's rage. "Ma'am, did you say pool removal?" "Yes. The Henderson property at 247 Maple Lane has illegally removed their swimming pool overnight. This requires environmental impact studies, drain permits, fill permits, landscaping approval." "Mrs. Whitfield," the receptionist interrupted gently, "pool removal isn't typically something we—" Karen hung up and stormed outside, her fuzzy slippers slapping against the sidewalk as she marched toward the Henderson house. She'd been watching this family for 3 years, documenting every possible infraction. Trash cans put out 15 minutes early, Christmas lights left up until January 2nd, and that one time their teenage son's friends parked slightly over the property line. But this was her masterpiece case. She rang the doorbell with the persistence of a woodpecker, her finger jabbing the button in rapid succession. When Tom Henderson answered, looking genuinely confused in his bathrobe, Karen launched into her prepared speech. "Mr. Henderson, I'm here in my official capacity as HOA board member to document your flagrant violation of community standards. The unauthorized removal of your swimming pool violates sections 4.2, 7.8, and 12.1 of our community guidelines." Tom blinked slowly. "Karen, what pool? Don't play dumb with me." She pointed dramatically toward his backyard. "The pool that was there yesterday, the pool you've somehow magically erased from existence." Tom scratched his head. "Karen, we've never had a pool. We moved in 3 years ago, and there's never been a pool here." The words hit Karen like ice water. Her mouth opened and closed wordlessly. She'd been watching this house for 3 years. She'd filed 17 separate complaints about pool maintenance violations. She had photographs. That's impossible," she whispered, then immediately straightened. "This is clearly some elaborate scheme to avoid HOA fees and maintenance requirements." Tom's wife, Linda, appeared behind him, looking equally baffled. "Karen, honey, are you feeling all right? There's never been a pool here." But Karen was already backing away, her mind racing. This wasn't just a violation anymore. This was a conspiracy. And if there was one thing Karen Whitfield excelled at, it was uncovering conspiracies. She'd get to the bottom of this, even if it meant calling in every authority figure in the county. As she marched back home, already planning her next move, she failed to notice the small for sale sign being removed from the lawn of 249 Maple Lane, the house right next door. By noon, Karen had assembled what she called her evidence board, a corkboard covered with printouts, photos, and red string connecting various suspicious activities throughout the neighborhood. Gerald had long since retreated to his workshop in the garage. "Officer Martinez," Karen said into her phone, having escalated to calling the police, "I'm reporting a case of property fraud and possible insurance scam. Someone has illegally concealed evidence of a swimming pool to avoid liability." The police officer's sigh was audible through the phone. "Mrs. Whitfield, we've received 3 calls from you today about this alleged missing pool. We sent someone to check, and there's no evidence any pool ever existed there." "Exactly," Karen exclaimed triumphantly. "They've covered it up so thoroughly that even you can't find evidence. That level of cover-up takes professional expertise." After hanging up on the exasperated officer, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She marched to her closet and pulled out her late mother's metal detector. Surely there would be traces of pool equipment buried underground. The Henderson family watched in bewilderment from their living room window as Karen swept their front yard with military precision, the metal detector beeping occasionally at bottle caps and loose change. "Should we call someone?" Linda whispered to Tom. "I think everyone in town knows about Karen by now," he replied. "Remember when she tried to find the Williams family for their dog barking during a thunderstorm?" But Karen was oblivious to their stares. The metal detector suddenly went wild near what she estimated was the former deep end. Her heart raced as she dropped to her knees and began digging with a gardening trowel she'd brought for exactly this purpose. "Aha!" she cried, pulling up what appeared to be a small piece of metal. Upon closer inspection, it was clearly a pop-tab from a soda can, but in Karen's fevered mind, it was obviously a piece of pool equipment. Her excavation was interrupted by the arrival of Code Enforcement Officer Janet Mills, whom Karen had also called. "Karen," Janet said wearily, climbing out of her city vehicle, "you can't dig holes in other people's yards. This isn't just anyone's yard, Janet. This is the scene of a crime." Karen brandished the pop-tab like a smoking gun. "I found evidence." Janet examined the piece of aluminum with professional patience. "Karen, this is trash. Pool-related trash." Karen insisted. They obviously missed this piece when they cleaned up their illegal cover-up operation. The situation escalated when Karen demanded that Janet call in ground-penetrating radar to scan for concealed pool infrastructure. When Janet explained that the city didn't deploy expensive equipment based on pop-tab discoveries, Karen accused her of being part of the cover-up. "Everyone's in on it," Karen declared, her voice carrying across the neighborhood. "The HOA, the police, code enforcement, you're all protecting them." By evening, Karen had called the city water department, suspicious water usage patterns, the environmental agency, unpermitted fill dirt, and even the Better Business Bureau, false advertising, since the house had clearly been sold under false pretenses. Her final call of the day was to Channel 7 News. "I have an exclusive story about municipal corruption and conspiracy," she announced to the assignment editor. "A massive cover-up involving city officials and HOA fraud." As she waited for the news crew she was certain would arrive, Karen stood at her window, watching the Henderson house like a detective on a stakeout. Tomorrow, she would prove that she wasn't crazy. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. But as darkness fell and no news van appeared, a terrible thought began to creep into Karen's mind. What if she was wrong? She pushed the thought away immediately. Karen Whitfield was never wrong about HOA violations. Never. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Karen's door. Her neighbor from across the street, elderly Mrs. Chen, holding a plate of homemade cookies and wearing an expression of gentle concern. "Karen, dear," Mrs. Chen said softly, "might I come in? I think we need to talk." Karen reluctantly let her in, immediately launching into her latest theory about underground pool smuggling rings. But Mrs. Chen held up a weathered hand. "Karen, honey, there was never a pool at the Henderson house," she said with the patience of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human folly. "But there was one next door, at 249 Maple Lane." Karen's conspiracy speech died in her throat. "What? The Johnsons lived there for 20 years with that lovely blue pool. They moved out last week. That's what you saw being removed. It was their moving day. The new owners are having it filled in this weekend." The world seemed to tilt around Karen. She sank into her kitchen chair, staring at Mrs. Chen as the truth settled like concrete in her stomach. 3 years of watching the wrong house. 3 years of filing complaints about a pool that belonged to entirely different people. "But I have photographs," Karen whispered. Mrs. Chen nodded gently. "Of the Johnsons' pool, dear. You just had the address confused. The documentation, the violation reports, the carefully catalogued evidence of non-compliance, all of it targeting the wrong family." Karen felt something crack inside her chest. Her certainty, her righteousness, her entire identity as the neighborhood's watchful guardian. "Oh God," she breathed. "I called the police. I called everyone. I accused them of criminal conspiracy. Gerald appeared in the doorway, having heard Mrs. Chen's explanation. His expression was unreadable, but Karen caught something in his eyes she'd never seen before: disappointment. Karen, he said quietly, maybe it's time to step back from the HOA board. The suggestion hit her like a physical blow. The board was her purpose, her domain, her way of maintaining order in a chaotic world. Without it, who was she? Just another suburban housewife with too much time and too little perspective. I need to apologize, she said suddenly, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. I need to go apologize to the Hendersons right now. But when she reached their front door, her courage failed her. How do you apologize for 3 years of harassment? How do you explain that you've been watching the wrong house, filing false reports, making their lives miserable based on a simple mistake? Through the window, she could see Tom Henderson helping his daughter with homework at the kitchen table. Linda was cooking dinner, occasionally laughing at something their son said. They looked happy, peaceful. Everything Karen's own home had stopped being years ago. Instead of knocking, Karen slowly walked back to her house, Mrs. Chen's words echoing in her mind. As she passed the Johnsons' old house -249 Maple Lane, she could see contractors already setting up equipment to fill in the pool she'd been obsessing over for 3 years. That evening, Karen drafted her resignation letter from the HOA board. But as she sat staring at the computer screen, another thought crept in. Maybe the Hendersons weren't entirely innocent. Maybe they'd planted evidence to confuse her. Maybe they'd somehow orchestrated this whole thing to discredit her authority. She deleted the resignation letter and opened a new document. Incident report: possible conspiracy to undermine HOA authority. Old habits, after all, die hard. But for the first time in years, Karen felt a tiny seed of doubt growing in the back of her mind. And sometimes, doubt is the first step toward wisdom, even for a Karen.